Hello all, welcome back to the podcast. I said at the end of last year that you should gear up for 2022 because it's going to be a massive one, and January has kicked off in such fashion. I think in the next 3.5 weeks I'm recording 15 different episodes. So there is lots of momentum coming into this, starting with this episode here that I'm releasing today with Leonard Mlodinow. When I first reached out to Leonard, it was with the intention to interview him about his wonderful book, A Drunkard's War. And I'm sure you're all familiar with how influential Nassim Taleb has been on my worldview. The language of risk, the language of randomness, probability, chance, all of it brought forward to be understood by the masses. It's an absolutely remarkable piece of work. And for me, a book authored by Leonard, A Drunkard's Walk, is something that I laud right beside the works of Taleb and the Inserter, because it achieves this same elevated discussion of randomness, bias, and probability, and then how it might influence our own behavior, but then also much of the behavior we perceive around us as well. And in response to my initial email to Leonard asking to interview him about A Drunkard's Walk, he responded that since it's been years since he's thought about it, we should instead discuss the ideas coming from his newest book, Emotional. In Emotional, Leonard tackles questions such as what is the purpose of emotion, how emotions guide behavior, wanting versus liking. There's hints of René Girard and memetics, determination, and more. Leonard leads on anecdotes and studies from Mike Tyson fights to the Holocaust to head transplants and more in his explanation of emotion. This is the first time Leonard has lent heavily on podcasts to promote his book, so depending on who you listen to, you can expect to see much of Leonard in your podcast feed over the next few weeks and months. And please, if you do like it, make some noise, because with enough demand, we might be able to twist Leonard's arm into coming back on and doing The Drunkard's Walk as a podcast as well. But here's a bit about Leonard. He's such a fascinating guy, and he has had such an eclectic mix of roles throughout the years. He was born in 1954 in the USA, in Chicago, I think, and both of his parents were Holocaust survivors, which is relevant to say here because his parents' stories inform much of the autobiographical sections of the book Emotional, which we discussed in this podcast today. Leonard has been a writer in Hollywood. He's written for Star Trek and other TV series. He was a corporate executive and is as well a multiple times best-selling author. I already mentioned A Drunkard's Walk. We're here today to talk about Emotional, but he's also authored Subliminal, Elastic, and 2 books alongside the great Stephen Hawking, plus several more as well. And all of this goes without saying what is the true backbone of his career, which is that Leonard is a world-class theoretical physicist. He is among the finest scientific writers able to capture the language of the universe for general consumption. He was mates with Richard Feynman, he's worked with Steven Spielberg, and he was trusted with the memoirs of Stephen Hawking. Leonard is truly a terrific writer, so in addition to going out and picking up Emotional, do yourselves a favor and bundle in A Drunkard's Walk as well. In this podcast with Leonard, you can expect to hear him speak about emotional intelligence. What is it? Why is it significant? How can one improve it? What does it actually mean? The unbelievable story of a Soviet man who potentially saved the world. In an alternative universe without this man Petrov, things truly do look quite a lot different. As well, we talk about Leonard's writing process, which involves finding obscure but relevant anecdotes and scientific studies that support the arguments that he tries to make throughout his books, and then also a whole lot more as well. As always, you'll be able to find the timestamps to go to exactly the places you want to go, but just listen to beginning to the end, because the chat is not as structured here as the timestamps may seem, because although there is a general theme of a certain timestamp, say a 20-minute window, there are lots of peaks and troughs which it undulates between. And finally, please do hang around to the end just to hear my afterthoughts and also to hear my ambition for the podcast. And therefore, with nothing else to say, here is the great and erudite Leonard Mlodinow. Leonard, thank you so much for joining me, mate.
Nice to be here, Ryan.
So, talk to me about head transplants. What's this doing in a book about emotion?
That's a great way to start. Well, one of the points of my book is that uh, there's a tremendous mind-body connection, and your emotions are very much based on information coming into your brain about your body, the state of your body, on a very fundamental level. So your body is constantly reporting into your brain. Are you cold? Are you hot? Are you hungry? Um, and is there any threat in the immediate area around you? What's your blood pressure? And all that information is getting determining your emotion state at any given time. And So I was writing about how this works, and this is the head transplant turns out to be a very vivid illustration of that, because I was happy to discover, as I was doing research for on this area, that, well, happy is maybe a bad word, but very like interested to discover that there's a long history of people trying to transplant heads of animals onto other animals, starting with dogs, and they did monkeys. I'm talking about for over 100 years. There have been occasional attempts at that. And that really brings up the question in a very stark manner. I mean, this is literally the mind-body connection is being severed, and the mind is being put onto another body. And I actually found that there's a group of researchers, and they're based in China, that are trying to figure out how they could do this for humans. With all, yeah, of course they are. With all the there's a lot of issues, scientific, technical, ethical, moral, legal. I won't get into that, but the bottom line for me was that that there were some people who are scientists who were looking at this and analyzing what they were doing, and they came to the conclusion that one reason that that this might not work is the shock of having a different body connected to the mind, and that the brain taking this new input that's so different than it's used to having from its original body just couldn't handle it, and that itself was a reason that the transplant might not work. So really, the point of that story, as interesting as it is, the point of the story was that your mind body connection is so intimate that you can't even if you could solve all the other problems, you can't just swap one for the other. It would be a huge shock to the system.
That really feeds into what I want to finish with later, with the C. elegans anecdote that you write about in the book, but then Taleb also has a very sort of, what would you say, provocative aphorism on. And it's just the notion that just because you can sequence something doesn't necessarily mean you understand it. And perhaps you could exactly match the head onto the other body, make sure that all of the physical inputs are perfect, but you're not accounting for the infinite complexity of whatever is happening between the brain and the body that we don't necessarily understand. What motivates the interest of hundreds of years of head transplants? What motivates someone to want to test different animals and different bodies?
I don't know what motivated those scientists. Tell you the truth, I'll tell you what they said. I don't know about the earlier ones. I mean, this started around 1900, but the ones who are currently looking at it for humans, they gave the usual justification that you might give for a heart transplant or a lung transplant or a kidney transplant. They said there are people who die of head trauma and have a perfectly good body, and there are people with perfectly good heads whose body is giving out on them, and so why not swap them, and have a body donor for someone whose brain is in fine shape. I mean, if we take all the moral and ethical or philosophical issues out of it, it makes perfect sense. But I don't know if you can take those out of it, and also the complexity of that head or a brain transplant is so great that it's hard to imagine doing it in a way where at least the first hundreds of subjects aren't pure guinea pigs before you get it right. And that brings up other ethical questions.
Yeah, you got some serious ethical trial and error dilemmas to face there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll tell you, I like when I write my books, I see that I don't try to write when I write a book, I see my niche or my realm as being a storyteller and someone who can not only make the science understandable, but I really seek to find interesting, dramatic, humorous, or otherwise compelling stories. And I used to write for television. I wrote for Star Trek: The Next Generation and MacGyver, and I actually wrote for some comedy shows too here in the States. And so I feel like one thing I bring to it is a feeling for that kind of storytelling. And so I try to illustrate the points that I have with unique stories that I find. So, not things mundane, but I spend a lot of time searching for stories that would be relevant or for introducing or illustrating my point. So not all of them are this crazy, but I see what I can find, and I'm always happy when I come across something that's just mainly that it's interesting. If I find something interesting and it's illustrative, then I think that's a win for me, and I think for my readers. So that's why that those things get in there. And with emotions, I have to say there's a wealth of it because of the nature of it. I mean, when I was writing, I know you like The Drunkard's Walk on randomness, my book on randomness and how it affects your life. There's stories in there too, but when you're writing about emotion, then it's almost from the get-go, there's going to be dramatic and weird stories because of the nature of that topic. It can be like that.
Mm. You mentioned that you did write for Star Trek, MacGyver, etc. We're here talking about a book you wrote about emotions. You're also a world-class physicist. You wrote memoirs for Stephen Hawking. I wonder whether you yourself, this is something that I sort of actually put away in the don't ask file, but it seems relevant to bring it up. Are you writing yourself a memoir, and what do you think about memoir writing?
Well, I've written two memoirs, I guess. I mean, so the books I wrote with Stephen were books on cosmology. So we wrote A Briefer History of Time, which is our first book. He contacted me and asked if I would write that with him. He had read my first two books, which was Euclid's Window about curved space, and Feynman's Rainbow, which was a memoir about my first time at Caltech, California Institute of Technology, when I was a young faculty member, and I got to be friends with Richard Feynman, who was an iconic physicist. And I wrote, and I was also exploring my writing passion.
Quite a comrade.
And all that, and trying to figure out what to do with my life. And that was a memoir I wrote. And Stephen liked those books. He read them. And he thought he liked my sense of humor, or so he said. And he was looking for someone to write with, and someone who understood physics. Not a lot of people who are good writers and understand, theoretical physics. And so he asked me if I would work with him. And that book was, it wasn't a very original. We took his original book, A Brief History of Time, and we just reworked it to make it more understandable, because he knew a lot of people were reading it and not getting it. And so that was fun to do with him. And we interacted mainly by email for that. And I was on the faculty at the time at Caltech, the California Institute of Technology. I was back on the faculty after a hiatus to do the TV writing. And so he would come every year for about a month. So I would see him then, but we didn't get really close then. It was a pretty easy rewrite. But then when that was over, and it was fun, and I realized that that he had done a lot of very interesting work in the 2000s, but A Brief History of Time and A Briefer History of Time and Universe in a Nutshell and all his other books were all about the stuff he did in the 70s and early 80s. And he had never written something about his current work. So one day when he was visiting again at Caltech, I walked into his office and said, proposed that we write a book about his latest work. And that became The Grand Design. And then I worked with him very closely for about 4 years and spent a lot of time in Cambridge with him. So that was a book about the origin of the universe. But then recently I wrote my second memoir, which was about my relationship with him and, what it was like to work with him. And that was shortly after his death, in fact. So I go through that. So I've written two memoirs. I don't know if I have another one planned, but
I was thinking more autobiographical, because you do have such a storied and colorful life and have achieved so many things in so many different areas. Like, it would make for an amazing autobiography, especially considering your parents' stories, who themselves have amazing stories, right? So, I mean, is this something that you've thought about, or maybe you're working on?
I have thought about it, and I put a lot of autobiographical elements in all my books. If I find that when I'm doing that search for something that's interesting, or dramatic or humorous or whatever, that illustrates a point, and I find one in my own life, which is the first place I look because it's at my fingertips. I put that in my book, and there's a lot of stuff I got from my parents, who were both Holocaust survivors, and my father was in the resistance and then in the concentration camp. So there's a lot of that. But I've thought a little bit about writing a memoir. I mean, I was in Hollywood. I was a physicist, became a physicist, went to Hollywood and wrote for years. Then went and moved into computer games and produced computer games. Then I became a corporate executive running software division, and then I went back to Caltech again on the faculty and started writing these books that I'm writing and stuff like that. It's kind of a lot of different things, and I've been publishing physics papers all along as a hobby for the last 30 years or whatever, and getting and publishing them in respected journals, and so it's kind of But then I decided it's not that interesting. I mean, the headlines maybe are interesting, but I didn't really see since I'm not a Hollywood celebrity, I didn't really see competing with the or a political celebrity with all the memoirs that come out from those people that are much
but
better
Leonard,
known.
you're not competing with the Hollywooders or political celebrity. I mean, they necessarily have less interesting lives. I mean, one of the greatest autobiographies of all time was Feynman's. What's it called, Mr. Feynman?
Surely you're joking.
Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman, of course.
Yeah,
that's amazing. And obviously he was involved in the Manhattan Project, and he himself was an extremely colorful character, so that made for an entertaining memoir biography. But I think you'll find if you were to just poll random friends of yours, they would probably have that up there as one of the best autobiographies of all time. And I'm just saying, as someone totally impartial, that after I read Drunkard's Walk, I did become very fascinated in you, right? And I think that's typically what people do with authors they like. They want to know more about the author, what informs them to then write the way that they do and have these interests. And, you just mentioned that you're also in the corporate world, running some as an executive. There's a lot of layers and extra flavor that comes to it. And whether it's just for your kids and for your family, or whether it's for public interest, I think an autobiography would be a terrific piece of work, truly.
All right. Well, I'll take that as an advisement. Maybe it wouldn't be bad to do for my kids because, I guess I'd like, but they've probably heard all the stories at one point or another anyway. But
yeah, but still, it's kind of like a window into, what was Dad thinking at this age and this sort of thing. I think about, I don't have any children, but when I do have them, because I wish I knew more about my own parents or my own grandparents, who don't necessarily leave stories behind. I think it's more an exceptional person who decides to leave stories behind, and most people decide it either just fades away or they're just not interested in sharing it, whatever. But I think about that for my own children, and whether it was ever for public interest or consumption, just recording your life to say, this is who I was. I really think now maybe I'm jaded because I don't have kids. I don't know what it's like, right? Maybe I'll change my mind, but I feel like it'd be a beautiful thing, if nothing else.
Oh, well, thank you. It's an interesting idea that I've thought about. Maybe I'll do it someday.
We'll return to emotional. I want to ask you about the story of Petrov, the Russian engineer turned military man who broke protocol in a system where breaking protocol could literally mean your head. And so this made me think of The Drunkard's Walk, because his reaction is explicable by emotions, which you go into to tell, but it's still an impossibly long odds that he happened to be the one sitting there on that day to react in that exact fashion. And in some parallel universe, things would look quite different right now.
Another human being there might very well have made the same decision. I don't know what percentage of people would have made one decision versus the other. I guess I should say what the decision was, since we didn't really say that. But he was responsible for monitoring whether or not the United States had launched a nuclear attack on Russia. This is in the 1980s, during the middle of the Cold War. And there were all these computers that were there were a lot of sensors around the world, and there were computers analyzing it to make sure, and there were fail-safe system after fail-safe system, or redundancies built in, so that there wouldn't be a mistake. And so one day he just gets this very certain report that indeed we just launched a nuclear attack on Russia. And his job was solely to pick up the phone and tell his superiors that that happened so they could launch a retaliatory strike. And had he done that, I guess we wouldn't be here. But he had just I don't remember the exact amount of time, a minute or half a minute or something to make this decision, because at some point they're just going to be here if they're real. Are they real or are they not real? And the point of that was that were that computerized, I always wondered, why did they put a person there when they have all these computers feeding in, and it's all redundancy, and his marching orders were, if you see this, then do this. A computer could have done that part, right? I see the report. I'm triggering an alert to the whatever, the generals with their fingers on the button. But instead, they had a person there. I don't know why they did that, but that person,
they needed jobs to fill.
Well, maybe, but thank God they did, because that person has emotions and has gut feelings, intuition, which come from your emotions, and has also empathy for people who are being killed and fear of killing hundreds of millions or billions of people. And he decided, even though he had no evidence for that, not to push the button and to call it a malfunction. Well, to wait and not push the button, and then it became clear that it was a malfunction when they didn't all blow up. And so that was just an illustration of the use of our emotions. One of the themes of the book is that emotions are very important for decision making and very constructive. People tend to think that emotions are counterproductive and to good decision making, and they get in the way. And this goes all the way back to Plato and the Christian philosophers after Plato, who divided up rational mind and your passions that get you in trouble and cause you to do things that you shouldn't do, and that immoral or ill-advised things by coming from your passions, your emotions, whereas your cool, calculating head knows better. And that is totally wrong. So your emotion, first of all, in the brain, you can't really separate this, say this is your logical processing area, this is your emotional area. It's all distributed and spread around in different ways. And same thing with your thinking. Even though I'll talk about logical, rational thinking, and I'll talk about emotions, they're not really separable. Your brain does information processing. As it does information processing, both your logical reasoning and your emotion state enter into it, and they work together. You can't really separate it. And your emotion state influences the outcome of your otherwise rational processing. So given the same situation, if you're in one emotional state versus another, you'll come up with different conclusions. So putting a computer in Petrov's place would have been a totally different outcome. But the fact that you have emotions that allow you, they allow you to have a more nuanced and sophisticated form of information analysis. And by doing that, he realized that this was not the right thing to do. But maybe I should give you an example of what emotions do. I'll give you two examples. I'll give you a real life example and a laboratory example.
Okay.
Because real life is so when research psychologists study emotions, they like to analyze real life situations, but there's no control over them, so it's hard to do scientific experiments in that. In the lab, you simplify things, so things are a little bit oversimplified, but you have control over them. So they're both useful. I'll give you a mundane example. Okay, when you're processing information, the idea is not just that your brain uses logic to get from the data to the output, but before that even happens, the data has to be selected. What data is your brain going to process? You're constantly getting sensory data in your ears and your eyes, through your eyes and all your senses, but most of it doesn't register. The cocktail party effect where you're talking to somebody and there's just a kind of unintelligible sound of everyone else in the background. You don't notice anything until your name comes up. Someone mentions your name. That suddenly your brain gets that, picks that out, and suddenly it's not unintelligible. It actually registers, right? Because in your unconscious mind, all this data is coming in, but only some of it is getting passed to your conscious mind, and your unconscious is deciding what to put to your conscious mind. How relevant is it? What's important? So the same thing whenever you're making a decision or thinking about something, your brain has to decide what sensory input to give you. So different emotion states will cause different sensory input to be filtered, analyzed, registered. And the same thing about your memories of your past. When you're thinking or analyzing something, your experience is important, but which experiences do you put in? What other knowledge do you bring in? Which knowledge is, how much do you weigh each piece of data? How skeptical are you of different pieces of data? What are your goals? All these things have to be determined to work with that logical processing to create your thoughts and your decisions. And each different emotion state causes a different balance of those things. So like if I'm walking in, say, downtown Los Angeles to a restaurant or a bar to meet a friend, and I'm thinking, I'm hungry, and I'm thinking, oh, what do I want to order? So when I get there, I don't have to really spend time reading the menu and thinking about it. It's nice sometimes to just know ahead of time what you're looking for and what path am I going to take. I want to get there on time. So is there a shortcut or what, and I'm just having those random thoughts. And then suddenly, let's say I hear something that gets my attention, or I remember that this is a high crime block or area, and suddenly I'm in a state of fear, right? So when I'm in a state of fear, I don't feel hungry anymore. It's not just that I say I'm not going to pay attention to the hunger. I literally don't feel that hunger anymore. My audio acuity goes way up. So little sounds that would have gone right in one ear and out the other are now attended to, and I hear them and I think about what they might be. I bring up memories of past experience about what are might those sounds be? What kind of situation is this? And so my mental calculations totally change. I make a decision when I get to the street to turn here or there, not because what's faster, but what's safer. And so this is a whole different context, a whole different framework that my thinking occurs in, because I'm in a fear state versus a hunger state or a relaxed state. So the laboratory experiment that shows this kind of quantitatively is kind of interesting. These researchers gathered their subjects who were college students and put them, half of them were a control group, and the other half they wanted to put into a state of disgust. So an interesting aside, because it's always fun to talk about how these experiments are done. It's often fun. They got a room and they put all kinds of things that they thought would be disgusting in the room, half drinking old cups of Coca-Cola, half-eaten pizza, garbage on the floors, and so forth. And they brought these students in, and then they have a way of testing their disgust before they start the experiment. And they found that they had not induced any disgust in these college students, because that's what the room looked like anyway. They had to redo the experiment. They used fart spray. They sprayed the room with fart spray and had someone in there, so it was like, so the kids didn't know it was fart spray. They thought it was real, and anyway, once they had induced the disgust, and they had them do some kind of task that was ostensibly what the experiment was all about. Okay. But that was just a throwaway. It was just something to make them, to trick them into thinking that was the experiment. And then on their way out, the researchers stopped them, and they had given them each a pen before the experiment started, or in another version, they gave them a little box, like a little gift box. They did it a couple of different ways. And on the way out, they asked them, hey, how much would you, if we want to buy back that pen, how much would you want for it? Well, one of the ways disgust changes the framework of your thinking is the emotion of disgust gives you a desire, an impetus to rid yourself of things, dispel your possessions. Obviously, it has to do with food. When you're eating something that disgusts you, you spit it out. But researchers have found that more generally, this is what it does to your thinking. It gives you a um, a tendency to want to rid yourself of things. And
Mm.
so they expected that the kids in the disgust state would ask for less money for their pen because they're happy to get rid of it just because they're feeling disgusted in general. So, and that's what happened. The kids who were in the disgust state asked for $2.50 for the pen, and the on average, and the others asked about 4.50. So this just shows that there they were analyzing the same pen, the same brand, and the feel, or whatever they thought they're analyzing, trying to figure out how much is this worth. They weren't aware that their disgust state was influencing them. They didn't consciously factor that into their decision, but that's the output from the same input was different because they were in this wrapped around this with this state of disgust rather than in a neutral state. So just in general, for each emotion tends to change you in those ways. In some specific set of ways, change the way your processing works.
Mm. If you're going to return to Petrov, do you want to speak about what specific emotion might have stopped him? Was it like an empathy for all the lives that would have been destroyed if he had acted upon what he was doing?
Or was it like I think it was a fear of murdering a lot of killing, causing the death of a lot of people, and a little bit more subtle too, because a lot of it I think was also intuition. And I talk in the book about how your unconscious mind on a different level is very closely related to your gut feelings and your intuition. And so this is all working in the background and causing him to come to the conclusion that he has no conscious logical basis for.
I loved the Buster Douglas anecdote. So terrific. How can one induce determination?
So what's interesting about determination is that, well, first we should realize that without feelings, you would not do anything, right? What would cause you to even get off your chair? It's a desire to do something, something that's going to bring you joy or satisfaction, or to get away from something that's painful, or you're
is desire emotion? Like, is that motivation?
Well, so desire, motivation, and determination and emotion are very closely related. And when we use the word feelings, we often include that. And when we use the word emotion, that's more discrete. It's more discrete. But I've decided for the purpose of this book, to discuss motivation and determination, because they're very closely related to emotion. So if you're just a logical, rational processor, you don't have that. You might have rules in your programming that say, if your blood sugar is low, get up and go get something to eat, right? Mm-hmm. So you might have a whole encyclopedia of rules like that. But unless one of those triggers comes into your environment, you're not going to do anything. And one of the nice things about emotion and about our motivational system is that it's much more general than that. It doesn't depend on a specific trigger to happen. It's much more general. So just the thought of something that could trigger a positive emotion is enough to get you to move. It doesn't have to be a specific thing like your blood sugar is low. So and motivation and determination are also closely related. So your motivational system has two parts to it: a wanting and a liking. The most basic evolutionary part of it is the wanting part. Okay, a wanting part means if I want food, the wanting means I see food, I go get it because I want it. That's what it means. I'm motivated to go get it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the more primitive way of operation. It's not that different from these rule-based that I was talking about before. They're very
it's rigid. Like a need, evolutionary, biologically need to happen.
Well, it's an imperative, though. I see it, I want it. There's no liking involved, so I kind of have been built to react to want certain things: sex, food, things like that. And so, at least with my hormones in the right level, so my brain sees that, and there's a wanting that's triggered, and I go for it. The liking system, which is more closer to emotion, is different. It has the same advantage of emotion, of putting a layer between the rule, the trigger, and the response. So liking means when the liking system is triggered, then that's information, that's data to my brain that I like this. So my brain doesn't just see that there's let's say a hot fudge sundae there. My wanting system, would if it reacts to it, it's just I see a hot fudge sundae, I want it. My liking system is I see a hot fudge sundae, I like that. Now my brain, instead of having an automatic response, go get it, it has a chance to include that as a piece of data that I like that, and put in other pieces of data. I gained 3 pounds yesterday. It's not good for me. Or I'm about to eat dinner in a half an hour. And then I make a calculation based not solely on the fact that I like that Sunday, but based on other information. And then I decide whether to go get it. So it could be that your liking system is strong enough, and when put in with the other information, it feeds into the wanting system and triggers that, and I go get it. Or it could be that I stop myself from getting it. So that's a much more sophisticated behavior than an animal that doesn't have the liking system and just has a list of things that it wants and goes for. And that's really what our emotions work in the same way. You could have an automatic response that if you see a bear, you run. Okay, that could be a built-in rule into your brain. But instead of that, when I see a bear, it doesn't trigger me automatically to run. It triggers fear, and then fear interacts with my reasoning and all the other data to come to the decision whether to run or not. Maybe I'm in a zoo, and the bear is not a threat to me. If I just had that automatic response program and I see a bear, I run. Now I see a bear, but there's a cage between me and the bear, or maybe it's on the other side of the river or whatever. I can now make a decision about whether or not to run based on other data rather than automatically reacting reflexively.
And that comes from the liking system that's generated from there.
Well, for motivation, that's how liking. So this was for fear. This is how the emotion system gives you an advantage. It gives you certain advantages like that you don't. You have a much more nuanced and sophisticated way of reacting to your situation rather than reflex. In the motivational area, liking does that for you. Having the liking system also allows that. It's a layer between the trigger and the response. It's not the trigger, then due to your wanting system, you go for it. It's a trigger. You have the liking system. You do a mental calculation, and then you decide whether you want it or not.
Mm-hmm. To make an autobiographical turn, to speak about your mother, my own grandmother, only a few years shy of your mother's age, also passed away last year due to like a rapid decline in Alzheimer's. And when you were speaking of your own mother, you mentioned how emotional intelligence was the last thing to go. And this really affected me because it suggested an awareness of how other people are feeling, but a complete incapacity to express your own emotions. Could you explain what's the significance of emotional intelligence being the last thing to go?
Well, it just shows how important that is to us as human beings, and I think that people have come to realize that the big explosion in emotion research happened in the last 10, 20 years, but emotional intelligence became a popular topic even before that. I mean, I think about 10 more years before that. And we now know that people with emotional intelligence do better in their relationships, live longer, do better in their workplace. It's very important to us. It's important to us for a good reason, too, which is that human beings, as we evolved in the wild, we were not capable of surviving alone. And so we lived in groups of 20, 30, 40 individuals. And we could survive if we cooperated within those groups. And so it was very important to have, as we were evolving, that emotional intelligence to understand what other people are thinking and feeling, what their attitude was about what you're doing, or how what their health was, if they needed help, and so forth, just to kind of provide the oil for the machine. So this is something that's very basic to us, and that's why it's interesting that it's one of the last things that you lose. And and also it also illustrates that it's on a very deep level in your brain. It's an unconscious level. Emotions don't come because you decide to feel this or that. They just come. They're automatic, and your understanding and your reading of people also comes automatically. And so, my mother, even though in her conscious world had a very rudimentary understanding of things, you could talk to her about what you're eating or the weather, but she couldn't
She loved
say
chocolate.
you couldn't add, yeah, chocolate. You couldn't add 17 and 8, or she would kind of some remember the president kind of, or but you couldn't get into a very deep discussion. But in terms of emotions, she was pretty observant still, and pretty on target.
Mm. Could you describe like what that is? What is emotional intelligence? And sorry for such a
Well,
basic question, but it's
sure. Well,
you know.
the book. I wrote the book to help people increase their own emotional intelligence. So, emotional intelligence is understanding first of yourself, what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, and then of other people, what are they feeling, and at any given time, why are they feeling it? How is this your feelings? How does do your feelings affect your thoughts and your mental calculations, your decisions, and how does that work for other people? And when you're aware of that, that you have an advantage because you understand what's going on. And also, I should say that emotions can get out of control. For one thing, emotions have a certain persistence. They don't disappear immediately after the trigger happens. You can, if you're afraid, if you see a bear and then you go the other direction, you're going to stay in that state of fear for some time, and so that can be counterproductive if this next situation that you're in is not the situation appropriate to a fear state, and you're still in a fear state, or if you overreact, somebody cuts you off in traffic and you get really angry, that can be counterproductive. So by being more mindful of what you're feeling and why, you can also take steps to mitigate that. I have a chapter on what they call emotion regulation, which is how to, when that happens, how to step in and alter the emotions that you're feeling. And it's again, since emotion is created on a subconscious level, it's a little bit tricky to do that. But there are techniques that people have found and used over many years, that some of which I'm sure everyone out there it just uses as common sense. But there are ways to regulate your emotions, and now we've studied them and we know which ways work and which don't.
So you're suggesting that you can become more emotionally intelligent. You can always teach yourself it because
Yeah.
So it's not naturally endowed like, say, your other type of intelligence might be. Some people are just born with more computing power.
It can be now. I mean, some people have a naturally intuitive understanding of emotion, but it's just like you could have a natural intelligence, but you still want to go to school. And I think with emotions, it works the same way. You have a certain natural intelligence, but you still maybe want to learn about it.
So it's like it's experiences, right? I mean, the way I remember emotional intelligence started being spoken about when I was in university. Never heard about it in high school, and I'd just taken like a business ethics course or something, and it was brought up. And it was interesting to learn about because all of a sudden, you got another way to measure yourself. Like, oh, I'm X amount emotionally intelligent compared to the rest of the people in the room because we all took this standardized test to see how emotionally intelligent we were. But it is, like you say, more than just an understanding of one's emotions. I mean, it's an ability to interpret another person's emotions. I mean, it's right tied in there with empathy, right? To be emotionally intelligent.
Right. No, that's true. Right. And that helps not only you, but it helps society to work when people are more emotionally intelligent.
So we're speaking through pixels and wavelengths, and this is how much of the world's business is done at the moment. This is how I'm sure a lot of your podcasts are being done. This is a totally unnatural way to speak. If you could zoom out here and this was like a breaking the fourth wall, I'm in my living room talking to a computer, and it's so unnatural. You can't get a complete sense for my body language, my scent, whether that matters or not, my precise tone, and a million more unconscious things. As the author of Subliminal and Emotional, what is missing in our communication here, and what are the implications on our emotional intelligence potentially for the broader society, since this is how so much communication is being done?
Well, I think that if you're on on a Zoom call or some similar call, as opposed to a phone call or
Mm-hmm.
texting, you're doing pretty well. I mean, I can see your expression and your not all of your body language, but some of
Mm-hmm.
it. Yeah, no, I don't get your scent, but
But does that matter? I mean, I'm just
I don't
wondering in
know. You
Subliminal
tell
whether
me.
there are things.
The fart spray part wouldn't work, I guess,
Yeah.
but it's not that bad. And I found it's interesting. I found that in the height of COVID, I was staying in, and I would have these cocktail or meet a friend at a bar where we would just do it over Zoom. We would each make a drink, and sometimes it would be a few of us, and we would sit and just talk and have a drink over Zoom.
Mm,
And I found that this is interesting. Now, and in Subliminal, I talked about how your Subliminal is about the unconscious mind and how it affects you in a way that you don't realize your thoughts and your behaviors. It's a lot like the book, the Emotional book, because that also is about how your thoughts and
mm.
behavior decisions are affected by, in this
How
case, your
instincts are
emotions.
kicking in a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What I found was that I would do that, and a few days later, I would think about, oh, I met Randy for a drink, and I would go, oh, no, actually, that was Zoom. But it kind of got blurred whether it was Zoom or not. In
Really?
my
Okay.
memory, it was more like it wasn't even relevant whether it was Zoom. And you'll see that if you read it. I have a chapter about memory and Subliminal, but that's how that works. So how you
Mm,
don't remember a memory. This is off topic, but just briefly, a memory is not a video or audio recording of what happened. It's more like there's certain key elements of it that are stored,
mm,
and when you need it, it's reconstructed from that and from other things in your brain, what you know,
mm.
what you expect, and things like that. So it would actually, after a while, I would think back and I couldn't even remember it was at a Zoom or was that at a real bar. And oh no, it was in May. It must have been a Zoom or something like that. So I think that we get quite a bit this way. But what you don't get is when you're texting. That's why we have emojis, for example. You don't. The emojis are very important, and I know
Mm-hmm.
that there were people who are arguing about there are people who for some reason don't like emojis or think that it's I don't know what I've just heard people criticize them, but I think emojis are
They're a minority, surely.
yeah, and
Mm,
punctuation is all very it's just it's a crude, but at least it's something. So if I say something, it's easy to misinterpret it if you can't hear my inflections, right, or see
mm.
my face. That we
Totally.
communicate so much that
Yeah.
way
Yeah.
without realizing it. So um, anyway, so I don't think I think Zoom is not too bad. I think what is uh, what is bad are these purely text based communications, and also maybe the supermassive communications we get through Twitter or Facebook, where uh, just throughout society in general, you can have emotional contagion happen because you're connected to so many other people, which is not
Mm.
natural, and so one person's hate message or fear message can get amplified by hundreds of thousands or millions of people
Mm-hmm.
who see the same thing and react to it, and then it goes back and forth and it feeds itself. But
Mm.
you didn't ask that, but I answered
I
it.
guess the internet allows for all types of unnatural, non-evolutionary modes of distribution. Like you say, you can be in touch with more people than ever before, but we can also do this conversation. I'm surprised to hear you say that it's actually not necessarily going to affect our emotional intelligence or stifle its development or affect it much at all. Because I
Oh, did I
did
say that?
assume. Well, yeah, you said it's fine. It's kind of like you
Well,
quite
I know,
enjoy
but
it.
I mean, I guess I'm saying that in our interaction, it's in each specific interaction, it's I think it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. But I don't think it would be good if you grow up having solely that. I mean, this is a stand-in for an interaction that we normally would have in person.
Hmm.
and that I have experience with, and I've learned about interacting with other humans by being in their presence, and then I can, when needed, substitute Zoom for that, and it's not a bad substitute. I don't know if I'm not sure of what you were saying, but if you were saying, can we from birth to death just communicate this way because we can no longer go out?
That's a bit
I think
problematic.
something would be lost there. Yeah, no, yeah,
Yeah.
because this isn't 100%. This is maybe 75%. Like
Hmm.
right now, you can't tell what my hands are doing, right? so, so, but it's not bad for what we can do. It's certainly better than an audio interview or a text-based
Hmm.
interaction.
No, that's cool. I mean, I wasn't suggesting that hyperbolic scenario as well. I mean, although that might necessarily be what the metaverse and potentially
Yeah.
these innovations in technology could potentially be drawing us towards. But no, I mean, it's interesting to see. I find the whole topic of emotional intelligence extremely fascinating, because it really has nothing to do with the other type of intelligence, does it? One can be completely inarticulate mathematically and I don't know whatever other measures that it is, while at the same time have incredible emotional capacity to take on burdens, to take on other people's burdens, to understand what's happening to them before they've even said a word. That's like truly the emotional intelligence at play, isn't it?
Right, and studies have shown that in terms of success, at least professional success, the emotional intelligence is probably more important than raw, what they call rational IQ or intelligence at analytical thinking. In physics, I think I don't think know if it's been studied, but it's probably not true. But out in the everyday world, the business world, I think in physics actually it works the other way in some sense. Not that emotional intelligence is bad, but social the need for social interaction is bad because it's a very lonely at least theoretical physics is a very lonely
Mm.
enterprise, and I sometimes think I would have done more research if I didn't need to interact with people. I could just sit in my office day after day, week after week,
Yeah.
just thinking, and not feel the need to interact with other people. I probably could have got more done. And I see among physicists there are a lot of people who are like that.
You did give the archetypal example in the book of the non-emotional physicist and how brilliant he was. So I suppose there's truth to that. Though perhaps it could also be explained another way, which is simply just the non-emotionally intelligent person doesn't feel the necessity to, like, you could say more on the spectrum, more autistic, more Aspergy. Typically the highest performing software engineers, the highest performing physicists, mathematicians, simply as a factor of spending more time doing the work and less time talking to people and fulfilling whatever their need is to talk to their girlfriend or to go drink a beer with someone to like calm down. Instead, they're just like, no, all of that stresses me out. And simply by factor of them working more, they become the brilliant ones. And it might not necessarily have anything to do with the fact that they are on the spectrum. It's simply just because they spent more time doing the thing.
Well, I feel that those who don't feel uh, the impulse, the need to interact a lot with other people, have an advantage because they find it easier, I think, to lose themselves in their work for long periods of
Mm-hmm.
time. And I find that in my own life too. I sometimes I'll go away to the desert, to a place I like there, total middle of nowhere, and lock myself in and up and work for a week from when I wake
The
up.
romantic author.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it is kind of like that, but it'll be. And I've talked to other authors who do that from time to time. So I would go and I really work from 9 in the morning till around midnight. I would have a breakfast,
Wow,
work
that's amazing.
and work over breakfast. I would go to this little dive place, have something, and start getting into the work, rereading what I did yesterday or something. Then I would go
Mm-hmm.
back and sit there and work around. Sometime in the early evening, I would go out and get some takeout food and from somewhere and put it in my room, but I wouldn't eat it. And then I would work until around midnight, and then I would have the food as my reward, and some tequila and beer, and
Wow.
and that, take maybe an hour or two for that, and then I'd go to bed and do it again. I do that for about a week,
Mm.
and I get so much done. I could get into it. I'm in a state of flow. Then you know what that is, the
Yeah.
psychological, yeah, and I would get much more deeper thinking and work done than I could if I stayed home or there's no distractions. And But after some days, you start to feel, at some point you start to go downhill for me, because I have no contact with anybody, and I start to feel the need for that, and then I can't just stay there anymore. I gotta leave. But now if I could do it, as some famous stories are, I think of people who do that, or who work that intensely for months at a time, like Stephen Hawking. His wife complained about when he got into like, especially when he was working out his theory of Hawking radiation, uh, months and months where he did nothing but work, and hardly, kind of ignored the kids, ignored her, and didn't, have the need, I guess, for that kind of interaction. And look what he got done. So if he could only do that for a week, he may not have gotten, they may not have reached the end.
It's kind of the price of greatness, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
to sacrifice everything else.
Yeah. Well, the question is, how much of a sacrifice is it? Stephen was in my experience, was a pretty social person, but I guess I could see him locking himself away for, a couple months, because he had such a passion and an iron will when he wanted to get something done, that would be more important to him.
Mm. I'm really fascinated by the writing process of the book, and I'm really happy you told that anecdote of going out into the desert. Could you lean into it a little bit more? So do you turn off the phone, disconnect from the Wi-Fi, and just have a word processing document open from wake till night?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, I may be that I, go out, take a coffee break or something at some point, and then might check my emails. That's always dangerous, because I don't want to get anything that's going to
That'll
distract
take
me.
you down somewhere. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So but I'm not saying I never did that, and I would try, if there was no fire, just, no fire going on, just to ignore them. Um, in my book Elastic, which is about how you get ideas and where creativity comes from, I talked about the dangers of that. So the phone, even if you're not checking it, if it's just sitting there and you know that stuff is coming on there and that you could check it, that in itself is enough of a distraction to take away your really deep concentration sometimes. So I really tried to make that a rule, and I wasn't gonna do that. I wasn't going to take calls, and just work offline on my computer, or even online if I'm doing Google searches for some of these, looking up papers or trying to find interesting stories. But I wasn't going to go to email or telephone.
It requires like significant discipline to do, doesn't it?
It does, but right.
Dopamine reaction, we want to check that. We want that gratification. We want to be distracted from the hard thing in front of us. We want to take the easy route, right?
Well, that's true, but I also, I write because I have a passion for it, and the same thing with physics, and so that overrides, I suppose, the curiosity of what is the email. It's I'm really into this writing. And it's not like I know you read about writers who don't enjoy writing, and they say, oh, the pain. I find it not quite the opposite. Wonderful, exhilarating. I guess to be honest, at some point, I'm a very much of a rewriter, so I write version after version after version, and sometimes on draft 37, maybe I start to feel that it's torture at that point.
Yeah.
But until then, it's great. But especially the beginning, all the creative part, and the figuring out how to say what to say, or turning out a good story always is exhilarating, and not. I don't get worn down until I'm deep into the into the rewriting phase, and then quite often I'll just, if that's happening, I might just say, well, I'm done then, and I send that draft in, let's say, to my editor, and don't get back to it till I get his comments,
Hmm.
So, and then I'll start on it again, but it'll be a couple months probably in between.
Nice. I something I really wanted to ask you about was your filing system, which might sound like a very mundane, boring question, but in all of your books, and admittedly, I've just touched Grand Design, Drunkard's Walk, and Emotional, but I assume in Subliminal and Elastic, it's the same story. You lean on potentially over 1,000 different anecdotes, papers, great psychological experiments. How do you process all this? Where does it come to you from? Are you actively seeking it out? And then once it comes to you, how do you file it away so it's at your fingertips when you need to access it?
Well, I'm definitely a creature of of the internet age, and the kind of books I write, more than, I'd say, 15 years ago, would not be possible. And when I wrote my first few books, it really wasn't, the all the information wasn't really out there and searchable enough, and the software was too clunky. So that was harder. I had to, use more books, um, or things had to be printed out, and then it was very hard to keep that, any files. Now it's not hard at all. So, um, what I do is, first I'm, understanding the subject and all the research, and takes a long time, and it's kind of like what we would do as an academic when you're writing a review article on some topic. So off every now and then you write review articles on some hot research topic, and you have to learn all the different research and different angles that people do. And so each chapter in a way is like that. It's like a review of the research on that topic, the scientific research over the last 10, 20 years. So it's a matter of, getting online, and you just use the search, like say Google Scholar, for example, and you start reading and gathering all the information. Of course, I talk to a lot of people, and in the
Mm,
neuroscience and psychology, I have a lot of good friends who are eminent, researchers, and they help me a lot too. And
that helps.
so you save, I save all the papers, so I'll save all the papers and different files. But I mean, in the end, I can just search, so I'll remember, like, oh, there was the fart spray paper.
Mm.
I don't have to, filing it is almost irrelevant. It's, as long as it's there, I just do a
So once
search,
it's
fart
read,
spray.
it's filed in the brain.
Well, I know the information, but sometimes I got to go back and find that paper, and I don't remember which paper it was, but I just do, you go to you just go on the
Mm.
computer. I mean, I use a Mac. I go
Googled
to
fart spray.
Finder. It searches my whole computer for anything where it says I can put quote fart spray, and
Hmm.
it'll come up. It'll come up, for example, if an earlier draft of mine had mentioned it. Well, that draft will come up, but the PDFs of the, academic articles will come up, that mention fart spray. So it's just so easy in that sense, that, you just have to remember some keyword of an article, and you can find it. You don't need to remember who did it or what the title was, or even the subject. I could just remember. I could literally just wake up one day and go, "Oh, I don't remember. I remember reading about fart spray. I have no idea what that article was," and there I'll get it. So,
Hmm.
so that's that, the finding the stories is just, a matter of, in the old days, what would they say? I can't remember. Well, it's outdated, but shoe leather, right? That's what they would say, because you'd have to go walking everywhere looking for something. Uh, it's mental shoe leather, where,
Yep.
I'm going, like, so I say, I'm thinking I have to illustrate this point, okay, but I want to get into it with a story. I don't want to just be a textbook. So I need to start. So I'll just start Googling around. Sometimes it'll be newspaper articles I'll get. Sometimes it'll be books. Sometimes I'll order the book. I'll go, oh, there's a whole book on, blah, 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 blah. This
Fart
should have
spray.
some good on farts. Yeah. Well, a book on disgust, for example,
Mm.
a book that, I'll just, and then with Amazon today, I tell you the truth, I'll get the book in a day or two.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes the book is you can read the parts that you need on Google Books. Not always, but I mean, I just order a lot of books, and sometimes I look at the book and no, there's nothing in there. I'll speed read a book, 300 pages in a couple hours, and see what I can get out of it. So it's just that's just going and having an instinct for what is interesting to the reader. And I don't want anything that's too long because it's just the illustrating point, but I want it to be interesting. I want it to be appropriate. I mean, if it's a funny story, but it's illustrating something that's, that is really serious, maybe that's not appropriate, or,
sure.
Have to make your decisions. And then there'll be times where I get a story that I get a little inkling of it. And I go, that's really interesting. But first of all, I need it corroborated, because I don't want, so say it appeared in the Tampa Bay newspaper. And I'm going, I don't know. I mean, nothing against Tampa Bay newspaper. But I want to get another source, So
it sounds like you got something against Tampa Bay.
Yeah. Did it ever appear in, anywhere else? Can I find a book with it? Or, like with quotes, for example, I'm very careful about quotes. When I wrote with Deepak Chopra, I wrote a book, and we were debating each other, our ideas about science and the universe. And he would always put in quotes by people. And sure enough, if I went to the internet, I could find that a quote, let's say attributed to Einstein, I'd find it all over the internet. But I have a higher standard than that, because I know that there's stuff that's false that's all over the internet. A lot of quotes, for example, and Einstein in particular, are attributed to Einstein, and he never said them. So you go a little deeper, and I would find a source that talked about that quote and said that he didn't say that, and I would send it to Deepak. You'd be surprised that someone like Einstein, people are analyzing, what he's saying, and I would find academic articles, say, or about that would mention that this, in a reputable scientific journal, that would actually mention that Einstein's often said to say this, but he didn't say it. And for me, I won't accept a quote unless it has a source. So if the quote is Einstein says, the sky is blue, I wouldn't put that quote in my book unless I can find somewhere where it said, oh, that's from his paper in 1937 or from his book in 1952, this book. And then I still won't accept that. I'll go to the book or the paper and look at it myself.
Wow. Okay.
See that it's there. And then I accept it. And it's something similar with these stories that I'm telling. There's a lot of stories on the internet. So when I find a story that's good, I'll have to find a place that's trustworthy that confirms for me that really happened. And often I'll have to find more details too. I'll have just the hint of a story, and then I'll spend days and days finding, the details, some obscure out of print book somewhere, or in some, in some maybe, obscure or newspaper, that local newspaper, that when you Google things, it doesn't come up, till way down. And you have to, find the right search terms for it to even come up, and then you get there and you need a subscription, and then you got to find a way to get around that, which there are often ways to do, and so forth. Or sometimes I would just buy the damn subscription for that one article or whatever. So it's the books have a lot of work behind them. Let me just say that.
No, I can only imagine. Truly. Is just to put it to bed, is the famous Einstein quote about compound interest, that it's the eighth wonder of the world, is that attributable to him or not? Have you looked into that one?
I never heard that. He supposedly said
compound interest. Said that compound interest was the eighth wonder of the world. Yeah, okay.
It doesn't sound like him.
And just to speak about the anecdotes, because I'm much more familiar with Drunkard's Walk, right? I've consumed the book several times. Opens up with the lottery winner who thought that he dreamt the winning numbers, but it turns out they weren't even the right ones that he dreamt. Like, those sort of anecdotes make a book, or just make a story. But I guess that's where your narrative brain comes into it as a former, fictional writer, right? So anyway, just wanted to put that in there. That opening anecdote is amazing. Obviously, the closing anecdote with Bruce Willis as well. That was so well timed out. Let's wrap it up. Okay.
You say you have three standard questions to wrap it up.
Standard ones. This has nothing to do with emotion, but I'm sure you can bring it into it. Okay. So, Leonard, that brings us to the conclusion of the interview, and I leave these 3 questions with everyone. So first of all, can you think of a moment that you were involved in, which looking back on, you just cannot believe you got to be a part of it? You cannot believe that you were there. And please ask me if you want more context for the question.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting. Well, okay. If this weren't a podcast, I would sit there and think about it for 10 minutes. But I mean, there have been, I don't know, I'll give you one. Okay. There have been many such times in my life, I have to say. Ever see the movie Zelig or
No.
hear of it? Woody Allen movie. It's about a guy who was not himself a celebrity, but was always somehow in his life coming in and out of the life of different celebrities, and there'd be a photo of him next to Einstein and a photo of him next to because this was took place, I think, a while back, John Wayne or whatever, and anyway, I feel somewhat like that because I've found myself working with, like even knowing Richard Feynman. I mean, he's such an icon in the physics. He was amongst physicists also in the population, but in the physics world, that worked with Steven Spielberg, Robin Williams,
Wow.
Gene Roddenberry, um, uh, um, oh my God, Marvel Comics. I'm Stan Lee. Stephen Hawking. It really goes on, and I've had many of those experiences where, whoa, I can't believe I'm here. But the one that just pops in my mind is even had nothing to do with those particular people, but it just popped in my mind. So I'll tell you, I give a talk in at a kind of a rock concert, one of those weekend, what do you call them? Like Coachella,
Festival.
Festival. Thank you. The weekend. I was in, and this was in the Czech Republic. They were having a weekend rock festival, and they had a little cultural corner or something, and I gave a talk there, and there were like a couple thousand people out there in the audience giving the talk, which I felt at a rock festival.
Wow.
Which I felt like was, whoa, that's amazing. But that isn't even the amazing part. I can't. Okay, I got some kind of a pass they gave me since I was one of the performers, where I could go backstage. And there was this, I don't remember their name, but there was this very famous European rock band playing in a band show with, so I had maybe 1,000 or two. They had like maybe 10,000 people, a sea of people out there. And I go up, I show this badge, and they let me in. I go on the stage. I'm literally on stage. I'm standing there off in the wings a little bit, so I'm not center stage, but I'm standing there right with them as they're singing, and people are cheering, and I'm going crazy. And I'm like standing right there watching them, and I'm going like, holy cow, like, how did I get here? It was like, I don't know. It was really quite an interesting experience. So there you go. That's my answer for that.
Brilliant. Absolutely
sorry
amazing.
to be so long. Sorry it was so long-winded, but you can edit it.
No, that's perfect. Really, Len, that's perfect. Finally, and like I started with off air, a little bit geopolitical themed, I can't help but project my own interests onto it. Is there a country that you're very bullish on? What is the country you're most bullish on?
In terms of its future, or
just yourself, your own worldview, how you perceive things to be good? You are bullish on this country.
I'm sorry to say, I don't think there is. I have affinity towards certain countries, but I have critical thoughts of. I think of all of them. The ones I have the less critical thoughts of, I think are I don't know that well, so I wouldn't even.
Sure, no worries. We don't know worries.
It's a sad, but that I'm going to contemplate about that after we're off, because it's not an interesting idea. I think that I think these are very, for me, pessimistic times. and
Well,
the whole future of the world doesn't look so bright right now.
Well, if you want to hang around for just a minute when we stop recording, I'll give you some optimism for a few magnificent countries. But finally, Leonard, this is my favorite question. If you could listen to a conversation, a podcast between any two people of history, dead or alive, no language barriers, who do you want to listen to?
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you and be quite predictable, but I guess I would say Einstein and Newton.
That's not disappointing.
So,
Nice.
Well, I'm a physicist, so
Sure. Are they the creme de la creme in the physicist community?
I think that most physicists would probably rate them as the top. Yeah,
Okay.
certainly I would. Yeah, and not only in their who am I to know about their brilliance? I didn't talk to either of them, but in terms of what they did. Yeah.
Well, Leonard, thank you so much for giving me the time. I was really, really thrilled when I heard back from you that you were okay with doing this. And so I loved the book. I think it's released now in Europe. I'm not sure. But it's terrific. I listened to it on the audiobook and Drunkard's Walk as well. I really can't praise Drunkard's Walk enough, but emotional as well. Terrific. Thank you very much, Leonard, for your time.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Well, that was absolutely magnificent. I felt super privileged and kind of nervous speaking to Leonard at the beginning of the chat. We spoke for quite a bit before and after the recording as well. A little bit about podcasts, what other shows he's going on, a discussion over whether the promotion of books through podcasts is all that it's cracked up to be. Some really fun stuff. I hope that if we can make enough noise, Leonard can come back on and do a Drunkard's Walk. And just assuming that this might be the first time someone's listening to the show, I just want to make the assumption that we have similar interests. So if this is the first show you've watched, it's likely because it came through your interest in either emotional, Leonard Mlodinow, or somehow through a piece of material that he might have shared. So hello, welcome, thank you for joining us. Let's assume we have similar interests, because what this podcast is and what my ambition is for the podcast is to corner the podcast market for eclectic curiosities in whatever country it is you're listening in from. So today we spoke about Leonard Mlodinow, we spoke about emotional. There is a whole range of other types of guests and topics that we cover on the show. So to reel off some of the highlights, there's a multi-episode series on discussing Friedrich Nietzsche, his life, his philosophy, the context that informed him to go down the paths he did. There's been 3 guests in total that have done that, but the one that's appeared most is Stephen Hicks, the author of Nietzsche and the Nazis. I had on Jack Weatherford very early on, the author of Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. James Robinson, the author of Why Nations Fail. A number of international journalists, geopolitical analysts, and then also some great storytellers as well. You go back to episode 33, Big Mike, the Australian Aboriginal who was actually adopted when he was a tiny child in Australia, taken to Sweden and then grew up in Sweden and didn't actually know where he was from until he became an adult. An amazing story there. Matthew Dix, one of the greatest storytellers of all time, a truly accomplished presenter and storyteller, telling stories, giving advice as to how one can tell their own story. Basically, that's just a flavor of the mix that you can potentially find in this podcast. So let's assume we have similar interests. If you've decided to listen to this and you're still listening now, thank you very much. I hope that you decide to subscribe to the show and then look at the other episodes that have been out as well. And most importantly, stay tuned for the ones to come because there are some very exciting shows on the way. And finally, put a review in because these podcast distributions are totally in the Stone Age. The one variable they look at for distribution is reviews. So if you're an Apple, leave the 5-star rating, write something nice, that would be amazing. And on Spotify, just leave a star rating, and whatever show you're listening on, leave a star rating if that's what they offer. So if you're keen as a bean to support, I appreciate it. It's the best thing you could do for me in the show. Thank you so much for listening. I hope all is well with you. Ciao.